Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessie Kingston. I am the Director for the Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity. We are here today to remember Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Day of Remembrance, and to remember those who perished, those who survived, and those who fought to save lives. We are honored to have distinguished guests with us today, including our Mayor, Chris Coleman, Holocaust survivor Fred Amram, and Dr. Ellen Kennedy from World Without Genocide. At this time, I would like to invite our Mayor, Coleman, to come up and say a few words and introduce Fred for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie, and I'm so glad everyone is here today. Thank you so much, and Dr. Kennedy, thank you for being with us, and Fred, it's my pleasure to have you here. This is an important event. I really do believe the old adage that we have to study history, remember history, at least we repeat it, the mistakes. And yet, every time I think about the fact that we look at and talk about the Holocaust, it seems to me across the globe we continue to make those mistakes. We continue to repeat the lessons of history instead of learning from the lessons of history. And so, even though 70 years have passed since the end of World War II, since the liberation of the death camps across Europe, we continue to look at every day in the paper stories of genocide, stories of attacks, whether it was attacks in France or in England, attacks in all parts of the Middle East. We continue to have to ask ourselves the questions, why do these things happen? How is it possible that we continue to see the same things going on over and over again? And part of it is because people sometimes don't want to believe that something so horrible as the Holocaust could possibly have happened. And so you ask, people do surveys and they say, what do you think about the Holocaust? And 32% of the people deny that it even happened. Because, some of it is out of hate and some of it is out of fear, I think is part of what happens. And so it is important that we gather and we tell these stories, and not just on large anniversaries like the 70th anniversary of victory in Europe, but to continue to do this on a daily basis, to tell stories about experiences that people have had. When we have a community so rich in diversity, with Hmong Americans and Somali Americans and Americans from all over the globe, an all too common thread is the violence and the discrimination that they have faced in their own communities and their own histories. The Karen that are coming to the United States of America right now, fleeing their homeland because of discrimination that occurred there. So this is not about history. This is about the present. This is about using history to understand the future. And when we do that, we have an opportunity to learn and to grow. But we can't do it by denying the fact that these horrible incidents have occurred. So I thank you all for being here to learn and to hear from Fred. And I do have a proclamation, I believe, that I would like to present. Fred, if you don't mind. I have the language, but it looks so much nicer when I actually have the plaque. Thank you. Fred, can I have you come up for just a second? So the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas Fred Amram is a storyteller, an inventor, a writer, an exhibition curator of women inventors, and whereas Fred Amram was robbed of his childhood by the events of the Holocaust, where Jews and other marginalized groups suffered grievous oppression, systematic persecution, and annihilation by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945. Whereas Fred Amram shows us it is possible to rebuild our lives after great trauma and to keep our creativity and curiosity alive. Whereas Fred inspires us to look within and to remain vigilant in the face of discrimination locally, nationally, and globally. Whereas we also observe Yad HaShoah, a Holocaust Day of Remembrance, in memory of the victims of the Holocaust and in honor of the survivors, as well as the rescuers and liberators. Whereas Holocaust Remembrance Day, we remember the people who died, the millions of people who died, and raise the story and the cry of never again. Now therefore I, Christopher Coleman, proclaim today, May 8th, 2015, to be Fred Amram Day in the city of St. Paul. So, and I just finally, last, I want to thank Jesse Kingston for bringing this to us and bringing our honored guest here today and her continued work to never, ever, ever forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And at this time, I would like to have Fred Amring come up and join us and share his story and some wise words on what we can do to never forget.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor. I really don't deserve this honor, one should say, when one receives an honor. In this case, it's absolutely true. One shouldn't be honored for being a Holocaust survivor. It's not something I did by choice. It's not something I achieved. It's something that happened to me. So I'll accept the honor with all the other things that were mentioned about being a curator and writer and all those things. Thank you for that. Let me be a curmudgeon right off the bat. The mayor suggested that this is the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, the liberation of Auschwitz, and certainly we ought to be honoring the liberators more than the people who were liberated. It was the liberators who made it all possible. But I want to make sure that you don't believe that it really was the end of World War II or that it was the end of the Holocaust. It was not. It was by no means the end. Just as we commemorate this year the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, Armenians will tell you that it isn't the end of the genocide. My children will tell you that the psychic bruises are still there. A new field called epigenetics will suggest that even the DNA is impacted by stress. And so those of us who experience stress, whether in Germany or in Iraq as soldiers or in Vietnam, all have stress symptoms that can be moved on unto the children and the children's children. I have a hard time watching movies about the Holocaust because it brings back images. My granddaughter, who did not experience the Holocaust, obviously, was unable to watch Schindler's List until her senior year in high school, even though it was assigned umpteen times. It was disturbing. And finally, one day, she and I agreed we would hold hands and watch it together. And that was a way of achieving that goal. My dentist will tell you that I still have the symptoms of a poor diet, not 70 years ago, but more than 80 years ago. I still have the same nightmares, as do people who have experienced any genocide. You all know that we have a holiday, we Jews, called Passover. And Jews and non-Jews know about the Passover Seder, where we remember the exodus of the Jews out of Egypt. And we say things like, God led me out of the land of Egypt. I was a slave in the land of Egypt, as though I were really there. And if we can capture that, we, all of us, then we can begin to understand all of the other genocides, and maybe then we will begin to work in opposition to those genocides. So while we said at our Passover Seder, I was a slave in the land of Egypt, we added I was a Tutsi in Rwanda. I was a Dinka in Sudan. I was a Muslim in Bosnia. I am a Christian in Nairobi, Kenya. Yes, genocide is going on right now. And where is everybody? Where was everyone when the Gestapo knocked on my door? I was 5 years old. Gestapo, said the tall man. Of course, when my mother opened the door, it was clear that anybody that would come in would be tall, because at 5'2", she made everyone look tall. There he was in his black uniform, his calf-high leather boots, his visor with an eagle and a death mask on it, his armband with a swastika, with his holstered pistol on his right hip. I want mine Haramram. And my mother, almost belligerently, said, mine Haramram is my husband, and he's out on business. Have him report to Gestapo headquarters at once. And then with a click of heels and a small bow and a Heil Hitler, he was gone. Papa didn't report to the Gestapo, but said he'll be back. It wasn't unusual for the men to be collected. The men disappeared. I think the first of the men who disappeared on our block was our kosher butcher, Herr Mundelbaum, Mr. Almond Tree, the kind of name that a kid will remember. Whenever the knock came, Papa was gone. He had ways of knowing. That same 3 knocks, always the 3 knocks, as though it were part of Gestapo training. 3 officers this time, with their pistols drawn. They made my mother and me stand in a corner, and 2 of them started searching. The lead officer said, radios. Where are your radios? And my mother said that we have only one and it's in the living room. And indeed they found our radio. They took our radio. They searched almost every other room and every other closet. We will check. And then the 3 of them clicked their heels, and with a slight bow and a Heil Hitler, they were gone. And the world stood by. Where was everyone? And you'll say, oh, I wasn't even born yet. And that's right. But where were you in '94 with Rwanda? Where are you now with Kenya? The world stood by. Did anybody care? By November of 1938, Kristallnacht, Crystal Night, the night of broken glass, every newspaper in the world reported Kristallnacht, when 1,000 synagogues in Austria and Germany were burned, and 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses were destroyed, were looted. And the world was quiet. The Germans stood by, even participated. But where were the Americans and the Swedes and the Ethiopians and people from Peru and the people from the world. Gestapo. This time one officer came, pistol drawn. Mein Hat Amram. I want Mein Hat Amram. My mother, as always, said, Mein Hat Amram is my husband, and he's out on business. What business does he do? And my mother explained that he sells textiles. He travels the suburbs of Hanover, and he sells textiles by the yard to the women who make clothes for their husbands and their children and for themselves. And her eye must have fallen on a room that was behind the Gestapo officer. He turned around and he saw that door. And then he called in the hallway. We lived on the 4th floor of a 5-story apartment building. He called in the hallway, Cons, I need help. And Cons, pistol drawn, raced up the steps into our apartment. Cons, open that door. My favorite room in the apartment was Papa's storage room. Perfectly white walls with perfectly white shelves showed off bolts of fabric in every imaginable color and texture. I loved the colors, from pastel pink to glowing red, from aqua to royal blue, from lemon yellow to grass green. Sometimes Papa let me stand on his ladder so that I could feel the different textures, wool and silk, cotton and linen. He explained quality by discussing the different weaves. I learned about dyeing techniques and why colors sometimes run. Papa explained which fabric would make a fine woman's skirt, which would make a man's dress shirt, and which should be used as a dish towel. I loved Papa's fabric room better than going to the park, even better than eating ice cream. The colors made my heart beat faster. When the officer saw what was in the room, the lead officer said, Cons, get help. For a half hour, my mother and I stood in the corner, pistol aimed at us, while Cons was away. He came back with 3 other officers, and they emptied the room. Of course, we knew that was going to happen. It was common in those days for Jewish-owned businesses to be looted, to be emptied, to be closed, and for the Jewish men to be taken away. When the officers left, as they clicked their heels and gave a slight bow, when the officers left with their Heil Hitler, my mother and I went into the room and we cried. And that moment was probably the last time I cried for many, many years. They found Papa by tracing his automobile license. They took him into slave labor and a road construction crew with other Jewish men. I was 6 years old when that knock came again. I answered the door, not my mother. I stood in front of my mother. I was now the man of the house. They came to search for something. They wouldn't tell us what. They left. And I knew that I would answer the door the next time. I wasn't always the man of the house. Whoop. There we go. I'm not getting it on here. I wasn't always the man of the house. You probably recognize that that's me. I was as cute then as I am now. I was born in a Catholic infant's home. Why would a Jewish kid be born in a Catholic infant's home? Hitler became chancellor on the 30th of January, 1933. I was born in September 1933. In those few months, many, many laws had already been passed against the Jews. One of them was to close the Jewish hospital in our city. And Jewish women were already unable to use public hospitals. And so an order of nuns, and I don't know what the order of nuns was, but they took my mother in and they said, we will serve Jews. And my birth certificate is signed by an Oberin, a mother superior. I bet you can't even say that. It shows you how these things happen slowly. Things build up. Then came the Gestapo. Then came Kristallnacht. What you think about when you think about the Holocaust is Auschwitz, concentration camps, barbed wire, skeletons. But that happens slowly. Auschwitz didn't open until 1940, and it wasn't fully functioning until 1942. I was born in a Catholic infant's home in 1933. Isn't that remarkable? Oh. There I am again. Still cute. I'm now, what, 3, 4? Looking pretty healthy. Despite all the laws, we were still eating then. We lived on Goethestrasse, and at the end of our street was a park called Goetheplatz, about a block in each direction, block square. And I loved going to the park. And my mother, who was a really good whistler, would whistle at the birds, and they would actually come, and I was persuaded that she was actually conversing with the birds. And one day, we came into the park, and there was a new sign. One of the benches said, Nur für Juden, only for Jews. I thought that was really cool. I jumped on the bench. That was my bench. I could have it almost to myself. Oh, there were some other Jews living in Hanover, but not a lot. When we came back a week later, I understood the full import of this, Nur für Juden. Because all of the other benches said Nur für Arier, only for Aryans. And it wasn't that I got my own bench. I got only one bench. And I want to tell you folks, those were the good days because Jews could still go to the park. Good in quotes, of course. And then one day, coming home from the park, we noticed that the trolley that ran in front of our house said, "Für Juden verboten," to Jews forbidden. And I couldn't ride the trolley car anymore. And then one day we stopped at the ice cream shop, which we often did. You know, my mother said, if you're a good boy, on the way home we'll stop for ice cream. You've all had that experience. And we went to the ice cream shop and we sat at a little ice cream table on ice cream chairs. And the owner, who knew us, came to the table and he said very softly, "I'm really sorry, but we can't serve Jews anymore." Could that happen in the United States? Could anything like that happen in the United States? Couple of nods. When I came to the United States, this is what I saw. And it was in most of your lifetimes that this changed. But in this country, albeit very slowly, people said, no, we can't do this. And in Germany, people did not. People stood by, even participated. To do away with this takes some effort. In Germany, we had to have ID cards. This is a sample. It says German Empire. At the bottom it says identification card, and it has a big J on it for Jude, Jew. This is my mother. This is my mother's card. And on the left side, it has some demographic information, her maiden name and the town where she was born and such. And on the right are fingerprints, and all Jews had the same profile, looking halfway to the side. For some reason, no one in my family had a middle name. And it wasn't because we were Jewish or poor or rich or whatever. It had nothing to, it just happens that we didn't have, middle names weren't as common then as they are now. But the Nazis determined that all Jewish men would have the middle name of Israel. So suddenly my middle name became Israel. And my father's middle name became Israel. And my uncle, and a tailor down the street, and all Jewish men had the middle name Israel. And it was, of course, a pejorative. It was a put down. Another identification, like the Star of David that Jews had to wear. And all Jewish women had to adopt a middle name. And it was Sarah. And my mother became Sarah. And my grandmother became Sarah. And my aunts became Sarah. And there were many Sarahs. Again, there's them and us. There's the Sarahs and the Israels, and there's us. And then came the call to slave labor. These are men from Hanover. One is an attorney. There's a cabinet maker there, a tailor, several merchants. They look very healthy, even muscular. You're thinking slave labor means skeletons. The skeletons had to become skeletons. It doesn't happen automatically. And that's my lesson for today. Things happen. Auschwitz grows on us if we let it. These men may very well become skeletons. But right now, like the picture of me at age 3 and 4, being well-dressed and well-fed, these men are reasonably healthy, are eating reasonably well, even muscular. The one in the upper right with the big hair, that's my papa. So all of this time, we've spent about what happened before the atrocities. And then came the atrocities. There really was an Auschwitz. There's the entrance. There's a gas chamber. It didn't have flowers in it then, of course. It's now a memorial. And there we look into the crematorium, and there we come close to the crematorium. And it didn't have flowers then. This is what you expected me to talk about. This is what you think about when you think about the Holocaust. But my goal is to give you a different picture, without denying this picture. Oh, by the way, this isn't the Holocaust. This is Rwanda, where in 1994, almost 1 million people were killed in 100 days. This is Rwanda. This is not the Holocaust. How do you tell the difference? You can't. This is the Holocaust. This is Bergen-Belsen. When Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the British in April of 1945, 13,000 bodies were found strewn all around. They couldn't bury them fast enough. 13,000 bodies were found by the British when they liberated Bergen-Belsen, just laying around on the roads. This is the place where Anne Frank died. We're running out of time. I'm told that I'm supposed to leave a lot of questions. Let me tell you a few stories. We skipped through some pictures because they were relatives of mine, and I wanted to tell you about them. I have lots and lots of stories. Let me tell you just about this one. My mother had 2 sisters. The youngest of her sisters went to Holland, married a Dutch person, Isaac Worms, and became Mrs. Worms. And they had a baby, my only cousin, Altje Worms. I met Altje only once. The Dutch were pretty content for quite a while until the Germans parachuted into Holland, treated the Jews of Holland just the way they treated the Jews of Germany or Czechoslovakia or Poland, anywhere. And Alcha and her mother and her father died in the Auschwitz gas chamber. Alcha was 3.5. I have no cousin. If you want to read some of my stories, I recommend that you go to my website. If you want to contact me, if you have more questions, more discussion, more whatever, feel free to contact me through my website. It's a wonderful website, rich with good stories, or bad stories as it turns out. My wife has illustrated some of my stories, and there's going to be an exhibition of the translations, visual translations of my stories out in the lobby as you leave. Why don't you grab one or more of these little pieces of cardboard that tell you all about the exhibition. We'd love to have you come. I don't know if the Benedictine nuns were the ones who allowed me to be born in a healthy manner, but this is at a Benedictine monastery, and the Benedictines seem to call their convents monasteries for some reasons. Men always rule, right? It's going to be at a wonderful venue. It's a beautiful building, museum quality exhibition, and we'd like to encourage you to come. Bring your friends, neighbors, and students. On May 31st, I'm going to be reading, and we will be talking about the art, and we'll be available to answer questions. So I was told that at some point I had to shut up and that I had to, and it's hard because obviously I could go on for many hours, right through to breakfast. But I'll happily answer questions. Ready, get set, go. You will do this, I see. Okay, I'm being replaced. Okay. I don't know what's happening.
Just do what you're told.
Yeah.
My name is Ellen Kennedy. I'm at World Without Genocide, a human rights organization in St. Paul at William Mitchell College of Law, and Fred is on our board of directors. I've been asked to ask some questions of Fred that have been prepared by Jesse Kingston's staff. So Fred, if you would come up to the front, and there also are cards at all of your places. We invite you to write questions as well, and to pass them over to the aisles to your right, and Sarah will collect them and bring them up. While you are thinking about questions for Fred, I'd like to begin, Fred, by asking about when you started speaking publicly about the Holocaust. When was it, and what motivated you to do that?
Is that a self-serving question? Actually,
It's on the sheet.
Actually, I began talking several years ago because Ellen, as director of World Without Genocide, browbeat me into doing it. It's an interesting question in that I have never not talked about it, that my children always knew about where I came from, how I came to be, but I never made a public statement about it. My focus had always been on building a career and all these other things that the proclamation says about being a curator and an author. And then Ellen browbeat me into speaking publicly, and I became convinced that I could speak on behalf of Altje, the little girl that you saw. I became convinced that I could speak for the 6 million, or the 11 million. We keep talking about the 6 million. The 6 million Jews, but altogether, if we count the gays and the blacks and the soldiers there are 11 million. And I'd like to speak on their behalf. And so I then began speaking in public.
What do you hope everyone here today will take away with them from your remarks and from your presence and your eloquence about those 11 million?
About those
11 million.
I first met Alice Musabende here in St. Paul on the steps of the state capitol. Alice Musabende is from Rwanda. Alice was telling how in 1994 she was 14 and was sent on an errand. And when she came back, she found that her mother and father had been butchered. Her 3 siblings had been killed, and her grandmother. She escaped. And she told about the genocide in Rwanda, and then she said, "Never again. Never again." And at first I was angry, because never again is the slogan of Holocaust survivors. Never again is what Jews talk about when we talk about the Holocaust. And here was this woman, black, African, Christian, many decades my junior, saying never again. And then I began to cry, because I realized that Alice was my sister. Alice is a child survivor. Alice has the same nightmares I have, except the people in her nightmares are a different color. It's the same story. She has the same memories, the same fears. Alice is my sister. What do I want everyone to take away from this? I want them to know that we literally are brothers and sisters, and that we are literally responsible. And were it not for the liberators, the U.S. Army and the Russian Army, the British Army and the Canadian, were it not for the liberators, we wouldn't have any Jews. We need to speak up. We need to protest.
Thank you. Several people have asked if you would share how you survived the Holocaust.
How I survived the Holocaust. I was one of the fortunate who got out pretty early. remember I said Auschwitz didn't really start until 1940. I arrived at the Statue of Liberty on the 15th of November 1939. Now, what happened was that somehow my mother and my father and I were able to get to Holland at the end of 1939 to visit my mother's sister and my cousin Altje, and someone in the United States sponsored us. And at the time, Jews to come to the United States needed a sponsor. Had we been able to come to the U.S. in droves, there wouldn't be 6 million, there might be 1 million. But had the countries of the world even accepted the refugees? But there was very limited immigration. And so we were able then from Holland to go to Belgium. We had been sponsored, as I said, were able to get into New York. And so we survived by escaping, which leads to where Mayor Coleman started the day by talking about all the refugees, not immigrants. Immigrants are voluntary. All the refugees that live in St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Hmong and the Somalis, and a few Jews from the Holocaust remain. We're obviously becoming very old. The survivors that you will meet from now on will all be child survivors.
I'm glad that you circled back to Mayor Coleman's remarks, because I think that raises a very difficult and important question for all of us. You had a difficult time adjusting to life in the United States, as does every refugee. And we have many new Minnesotans in our own communities. What would you like to see all of us do to help welcome those newest refugees among us?
I would like you to invite me back to talk about what it's like to be a refugee. That's a whole nother topic, a whole nother theme that I often talk about. The language is only one problem. The cultural differences are huge. And the cultural differences for the Hmong and for the Somalis, for example, are so much greater even than they were for me, being from a rather modern Germany, which isn't totally culturally different. There are a lot of bridges. But I do have lots of stories about the differences. I had a different, a special kind of hardship. When I came to the United States, once I learned to speak English, once I could maneuver the culture, I had two strikes against me. In the United States, anti-Semitism at the time was huge. And so a lot of the people I went to school with didn't like the little dirty Jew. And I was called that often. The other problem was that you could tell from my accent that I was German, and we were fighting the Germans. So I was also a dirty little Hun. And so I was discriminated against for being German and for being Jewish, which is kind of a no-win. Which is a problem that, for example, Somalis face in this country. What discrimination there remains in this country against any African or African American by skin color is doubly so for Somalis because they also then have the language and the cultural issues.
Someone has obviously heard you speak before because
Uh-oh.
there's a question about something you didn't address, and perhaps we'll finish on this very interesting note. Would you tell the story of the Hanover Torah?
Oh, okay. Because I have to reconstruct it. I usually do that with slides because a lot of folks have never seen a Torah. Let me start by describing a Torah. In the Jewish worship services, Jews read from the 5 books of Moses, the Bible. But it's on a scroll, a big scroll. So, you actually, as in olden days, and they come in different sizes, but traditionally they're about yay big, with 2 wooden dowels and the parchment around, and they weigh a lot. Okay, it was November 8th, 1938, November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht. The synagogues were burning. I'm looking out from our balcony on the 4th floor, and I see our synagogue burning. Papa is missing. Papa doesn't show up. It's late at night. Horrible things have happened that day. Jews were hauled out of their homes, forced to scrub the streets, often with their own toothbrushes. Men and women were hauled away, were beaten on the street. Horrible thing. And Papa wasn't home, so I got to stay up really late. Ultimately, Papa came home, and he was carrying what I assumed was a baby, and I really wanted a baby brother. I'm an only child, and which is common for German Jews in my generation, because as my mother said, why bring a child into a world like this? Papa came, and there was this big package wrapped in baby blankets. And I was sure this was going to be my brother. And he removed one blanket, and he removed another, and he removed another. And you, of course, already know where I'm going. It was a Torah that he had rescued from the burning synagogue. My mother was absolutely furious. My mother and father didn't agree a lot. You could recognize that probably happens in your household. My mother said, this is crazy. You bring a Torah into this house. You're endangering everybody in this whole building. And you bring it into an apartment where not even radios are allowed. Remember, the Jews will not have radios. Ultimately, she calmed down and said, well, what are you going to do about this? And she said, later on, things quiet down, later on in the night, toward morning, I'll go find the rabbi and he'll know what to do. Ultimately, I went to bed, and when I got up the next morning, my father was all smiles. Apparently, he had found the rabbi. The rabbi knew what to do, and my father was happy that he had rescued a Torah.
Do you know where that Torah
I
is?
have no idea.
Okay. Our time is up, and I want to say to Fred that you are not an only child. Look at all the brothers and sisters, Fred, whom you have here. We are all part of your family.